Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are continuing in the hearing in docket number 2023-154-E, which concerns the application of South Carolina Public Service Authority, also known as Santee Cooper, for approval of its 2023 Integrated Resource Plan. As we left off, we're on our first panel of witnesses and we are on commissioner questions. Gentlemen, I remind you, you're still under oath. Commissioners, questions for this panel? Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. We'll try not to keep you too long. Mr. Dembla, one of the questions that you were asked earlier was about applying the new rules that are being contemplated but are not yet haven't been, they're just proposed. They're not the law yet. Is that why you did not use them for any of your forecasts or any of your expectations?
Commissioner, just to clarify, you're referencing the greenhouse gas 111 rules. So the greenhouse gas rules were published a week after we finalized our IRP in May. Since then, we've tracked it. The industry group has filed about 3,000 comments, and these comments from the industry group range from concerns about the compliance timelines. The GHG rule for compliance relies on either carbon sequestration from existing and new resources or on blending hydrogen with gas, and the timeline for that, the industry thinks is not feasible the way it's written in the rules currently. So I think the comments are being addressed and discussed right now is my understanding. I think even the federal regulators have raised questions with EPA about the reliability impact. There is some discussion of reliability exemptions where certain generation units will be exempt from it, and you know, the EPA right now has acknowledged, I think the phrase one of the EPA officials used was that we're in the fifth innings of the rulemaking. We're only halfway there. So I think a lot of things are being addressed right now. The rule is still being baked. So I think it was very difficult to model with those considerations, and it would not have been very informative, that analysis. But we are committed to kind of following it closely and modeling it when it gets to the eighth inning.
Well, and maybe I read too much in the way people answer questions. I guess being a lawyer for so long, it seemed. Do you feel it's not going to pass, or do you have any sort of I guess any of us could have picked a Final Four on this football thing, but do you have a percentage as to what you think the chance of it passing or not passing? Or you just think it's
Commissioner, I don't, sir, but I have asked people who've dealt with these things more than I have in the past, and nobody put a percentage on it, but folks told me to expect that it might be materially different than the form it is in right now, based on the discussions and the comments.
And of course, if it does, then you'll certainly make adjustments in your projections in the next IRA update.
That's right.
Would that be possible?
Yes.
Okay. Some of the intervener witnesses proposed a lot of different things. One particular, that South Carolina tourism, that sort of thing. What is a timeline, if there is one, as to the use of wind resources, or do you think South Carolina would allow offshore wind resources, or is there another part of South Carolina that Santee Cooper would look at?
Commissioner, when we started formulating assumptions for this IRP, it was a very objective process where we did not know what the outcome would be, and we had onshore wind as a resource, and we had discussions with offshore wind stakeholders as well to develop some assumptions. Offshore wind is more prevalent in North Carolina, not so much in South Carolina, but we did have some starting assumptions, and we did for onshore wind. I'll be honest, I was having heard about South Carolina not being as windy a state as other parts of the country, and the solar being very attractive in South Carolina, I was surprised to see onshore wind playing a role in our IRP in certain scenarios. It's not in our preferred portfolio, but it did in a no fossil portfolio or some other, if you alter assumptions, wind does show up. So that was a indication to us that we need to do some further studies. And it's not, because it's not a very prevalent resource in South Carolina today, the assumptions are not well tested. So I think what we decided to do was in our short-term action plan to identify as one of the things we need to study more carefully. And at that point, we'll also look at land issues and more geographic considerations, because it can play a part in South Carolina in the future.
Do you think Santee Cooper properly addresses the needs and desires of these new industries who are looking for carbon-free, clean power?
Commissioner, in general, I believe Santee Cooper is taking appropriate steps to do that. For example, this is the amount of solar which a lot of our industrial customers prefer we grow as a part of our portfolio. We are going to, per our preferred portfolio, it's going to be a significant part of our future generation mix. So I think we are, but there are some industrial customers would want programs tailored for them, I think was identified in the testimonies, and we expressed openness to discussing those specific proposals, because they would have to be tailored in a way that serves the industrial customers' need, but without shifting burden or costs on other customer classes. So that is something that we'll have to work through on a case-by-case basis.
Would it be fair to say that sort of attitude or desire by industry is going to increase in the future rather than decrease?
I believe that's fair. I would agree with that, yes.
Okay. Mr. McCants, and I know Mr. Wagner used the word that earlier about an IRP being a snapshot at the time. And of course, some of these rules are not in effect yet, Rule 111. Right. Mr. McCants, you've been there, if I remember correctly from your testimony, since about 2004.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I think you've been there since 2016, 15 or 16.
Yes, I've worked at Santee Cooper since 2016, but I've, in my prior role, they were my client for another 10 years. So I've known Santee Cooper for a long time.
Mr. Wagner, I don't remember how long you've been there.
2001.
Okay, then you've been there the longest. They talk about modular nuclear reactors and different things. As far as a future look, and I know with the earlier fiasco, nuclear fiasco that none of us were here to deal with, why is there never any consideration? I mean, ratepayers having to pay for it. Georgia had an overrun, and they're now, even though they did, they're still pursuing their nuclear. What was the reason Santee Cooper would not pursue at the time?
So at the time when that evaluation was done, and again, looking back at Vogel, which I'm glad that project was completed in a different jurisdiction, but it cost a lot more than was initially expected. It was way over budget.
That's better than paying for nothing, and the ratepayers are still paying for the mistake. Shouldn't that money be going toward just, putting some good money after bad?
So, Commissioner, not being directly involved with that process at the time, I did have a opportunity to witness how that evaluation was done, and as it should be, that process considered, the money spent and as a sunk cost, and then does an evaluation going forward with all the resource options. And my recollection is that if that project was completed at the price that was estimated at the time, it would have, the ratepayers' rates would have been very high right now, unaffordably high. And there may be a distinction between Vogel and VC Summerhead in how many people were paying for it. So the same amount of money spread over fewer people becomes unaffordable. But that's a high-level response.
Are you looking at other forms of nuclear power, like the modular reactors, or?
So it's in our IRP. It was added as a resource option, and it did show up in certain scenarios, which relies less on
And
traditional
also,
generation.
I was a little concerned. I think the answer you got when asked about batteries were you were considering them.
I would rephrase that, Commissioner. Not considering them, I think that batteries are at a place where they are very likely to be a big part of our mix soon. It's a matter of time. It depends on how the load materializes. I think our preferred portfolio consists of lots of solar, a combined cycle, and then batteries or peaking resources depending on load projections, but no later than I recall early 2040s is my recollection.
Would that be something you could give serious consideration in your next update?
Yes, it has a very serious consideration right now. And in one scenario, if a high load case materializes, which means that we need resources sooner than 2030, it is possible that a battery may be in our mix sooner than any of the other resources. So it has a very serious consideration in our preferred portfolio. It's just a matter of timing.
That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First off, I would just like to say, looks like on page 67 of the IRP, you talk about your top 2% ranking for reliability, top 2% in the country, compared with IOUs and co-ops, and that sounds pretty good to me. So just
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And something else that I just saw the other day that I found a little bit interesting is one of your customers, the North Carolina municipality, Waynesville, North Carolina. They just announced recently that they are placing a ban on crypto mining because it takes a lot of energy and doesn't create much in the way of jobs. Have you all heard that?
I've heard that, yes. Don't know many details, but I've heard that.
Yeah. Have you heard whether that's under consideration anywhere else? That kind of surprised me.
I've not. I've heard from in different places where the type of burden it places on the utility, and for many utilities in states where it's economic development is a very important thing. It's one of those industries which sometimes consumes a lot of energy but does not generate as much jobs. So I think beyond that, I've not heard or seen anything, sir.
Okay. And I believe you mentioned the Cherokee Cogen, and you said that it would be available for this upcoming winter, which is happening pretty soon. So what's the status on that? I mean, I know we gave approval and that kind of a thing, but beyond that, I don't really know what's going on.
So I can say we are in very good shape with that project. I believe the transaction closed in late October, October 31, I believe. So we own the plant now, and there is a transition team with a big checklist of items that reports on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to the executive staff at Santee Cooper about the progress that transition is making. And I've only heard that that project is green. Everything is going on. It's on track.
Okay. All right, and there's been some discussion about the Rainy natural gas plant, and so it's close to Transco's, but who owns the pipeline between Transco and the Rainy plant? Do you know? Is that?
Yeah, Santee Cooper owns a portion of the pipeline, basically that taps from Transco that runs underneath the river and over to the Rainy facility.
Okay. And there's a little bit of talk about the potential upgrades to that plant to get a little bit more power out of it. Is that still under consideration? And what's the story on that? Can that happen? And if so, when? And just
Yeah, I can just mention maybe from a feasibility, from a generation standpoint, maybe Mr. Demla can talk about more of a planning, high-level function. But yeah, so the plan there is, we have one combined cycle package at Rainy, what we call Unit 1 power block. It has two units with a steam turbine combined. The thought is that we could modify the sister units next to it, Rainy 2A and 2B, which are simple cycle units, with a steam turbine and create a combined cycle package on that facility, and that would be where the majority of those megawatts would come from. I think there's a lot of other constrictions, and maybe Mr. Wagner and Mr. Dimler can talk about from a transmission standpoint, from a planning standpoint. I mean, obviously, we've located that facility near an existing pipeline that runs from the Gulf Stream all the way up to the East Coast, and so it's placed there because of the geographic location to the pipeline itself. But that presents also some other constraints about serving our load, which we've talked about today as being, more easterly driven within the state. So hopefully that provides a little bit of background, and maybe colleagues might want to add some more.
I think I would just add to that the two different projects potentially at Rainy that we'll look at this year. One is that Mr. McCants mentioned, which is to combine the second set of CTs to a combined cycle, an efficient combined cycle. And then there's also maybe an opportunity to upgrade this existing CTs and getting 90 megawatts out of it. It is my understanding that the uprating of the CTs is a relatively quicker project, but still will take some time. But the heat recovery system and a combined cycle is a longer-term project. But both of these will have transmission considerations and fuel supply considerations. But I think we'll look at both this year as opportunities. I'll also ask if Witness Wagner wanted to add anything from
just
the
to add, we're currently evaluating. So as part of our generator interconnection processes, the generation folks have submitted applications for us to evaluate the transmission impacts of these upgrades. So that's currently in the works.
All right. So on page 48 of the IRP, you talk about the solar purchase power agreements, and that apparently you've run into some problems with some of those, and that's either not going to happen or it's behind schedule. Is anything else you can say about that? I mean, or does that mean that there may be other potential problems with other potential projects and getting the solar moving?
I think I can, I'm trying to think carefully because some of the negotiations are ongoing, but I can carefully state that in 2020 or 21 timeframe, we had gone out for procuring 500 megawatts of solar. We had signed up 425 megawatts. I would say at least half of that megawattage is, or approximately half of that is progressing, is behind schedule, and we had to renegotiate the price given the challenges the industry faced, but to a level we were comfortable with. The remaining projects, it's still being negotiated, but we are not comfortable with the pricing that's being offered and the schedule. So those discussions are ongoing, but I'm optimistic about half of what we had signed up. So as we, and this market experience, it's going to inform us, teach us how we negotiate this going forward, because we're going to go out with larger solicitations in conjunction with Central in future to meet both our entities' plans. But yeah, that's the status of those projects, sir.
All right, and on page 59, you talk about the municipal and off-system customers, and that they have contracts that expire, grandfather, something like that, at the end of certain time periods. And my understanding of the way that I read that is that when those things roll off, then you're considering that load to be not happening. And my concern about that is that to me kind of goes counter to trying to increase reserve margins. You're making an assumption that those customers are going to go away. I mean, how do you make that assumption? Have you had experience in the past where when they roll off, they don't renew, or what? I mean, how do you reconcile that with building reserve margin?
I think, so there are two, if it's an off-system customer that we are not obligated to serve, it could help us with the reserve margin to not extend those contracts and make sure that we can serve our native load. And I believe, subject to verification, I believe, for example, the EMEA load, 50 megawatts, Alabama Municipal has rolled off or is rolling off very soon. Now, you're correct, sir. If any load connected to our system, we will make, either conservative or some. Here, there are two aspects to it. There's financial projections, so you generally don't want to anticipate revenue that you might not get. So you have to be conservative from that perspective. From the resource planning, you have to be careful that you don't not plan for load that may be there. So we do that with sensitivities. I think a witness, McCormack, when he talks about the load forecast, will be able to tell you what was assumed to roll off versus what was assumed to remain on the system. I don't have that information, but you're correct, sir, that we would not ignore. Even if a contract's rolling off, but we expect it might stay on the system, we would plan for it through sensitivity analysis.
And I believe that you mentioned Google and the co-ops, and that there might be potential to work together with them to meet their clean energy goals. So any thoughts about how that might work? Anything you can talk about there?
I think, and the idea was that, Santee Cooper in the past has engaged with Central and its customers to meet the specific needs of that customer. If they had certain internal goals, sustainability goals that they wanted to meet, of how a certain solar could be treated for benefit of that customer while not ignoring the needs of the other system. So this was just our way of saying that if Google has certain specific needs, we would engage with them. But the first step will be to hear what those specific goals that they're looking for, and how then if we can negotiate or craft a deal which achieves that and do it in a way that does not come at the cost of other folks on the system. So kind of trying to strike a deal like that. I think we can do that, but we'll have to first engage and figure out what the exact needs are.
And all right, so there's been a good bit of talk about battery storage and bringing that online, bringing more of it online. And I have a couple of questions about battery storage, and one relates to how does it perform in cold weather? And the reason that I ask that question is with regards to electric vehicles. When the weather gets real cold, their performance and their range or whatever just goes way down. And I have no knowledge about battery storage, whether those even resemble batteries that are in electric vehicles. But my concern is that we're talking about that as a solution. Do we have information to back it up in terms of how it really does perform in really cold weather when it's the most needed?
Yes, sir. I think I can handle that. I think that so we don't have precise values on what that looks like on a degradation per degree type of analysis. That's part of what we hope to accomplish through a pilot project, is to understand those types of things, to get operational data, so that for our region, for our specific service territory, so that we can understand those types of things and build that into our future planning. I think there may be ways to mitigate that as well, and a pilot project would allow us to do that. So that's one small piece of a larger initiative to understand batteries better and to understand how they best apply to our system.
All right. And again, this question kind of comes from electric vehicles, and this relates to fires. And my understanding is when an electric vehicle catches on fire, you almost can't even put it out. And not only that, but that the fumes and whatever is just awful for people and that kind of a thing. So my concern is that if you are going to put in a large battery storage facility, what are the considerations with regards to fire protection? So if you got this thing catches on fire, is the whole place going to go up and just make the biggest mess that you've ever seen? I don't know. I mean, are there any concerns, rules, regulations, any talk about what might be going on just because of the concern with the potential for fire and the danger that may cause?
Right. Again, so we've learned some lessons from out west, utilities out west that have lived through some of these issues. Battery chemistry plays a role in some of that. We're currently looking at lithium iron phosphate as being a chemistry that we're kind of geared toward. It seems to be the more from the developers that we talk to, seems to be the more prevalent today. That's being, technology that's being used due to the fire risk that some of the more legacy lithium chemistries had. So that's one factor to consider. Another is location. Where are we locating? Where are we siting these types of installations? Obviously, within neighborhoods or adjacent to buildings wouldn't make a whole lot of sense from a fire risk perspective. So we've got to be careful there in where we site these things. And then it's, proper training for first responders is another key consideration that we've talked about, making sure that the folks in the area who may respond to a fire in the event that there was one understands what the protocols are prior to that ever occurring, and making sure we design in fire protection as part of the installation. So those are, I think you asked for what are we doing to kind of think through how to mitigate some of those issues, and so that's the mindset right now. Again, all things a pilot project will help us with.
Okay. And so you mentioned the potential to, go in with Dominion on the gas plant, and then you also mentioned that would require legislative action. And I don't know, I guess I just have concerns about planning on something that's apparently not even allowed right now. And then the other part of that question too would be, so if you wanted to do anything else with anybody else, like let's just say you had a large industrial customer that was willing to go in on something. I don't know, let's just call it a small modular or something like that. Would that kind of a thing require legislative action too, or do you know?
So two questions, Commissioner. I think if I heard you correctly, I think the first part of it is yes, it would require legislation. So what this team is doing right now at Santee Cooper and the analytical folks is trying to evaluate and confirm that is, I believe there would be a strong case that it provides economies of scale and makes a lot of sense, and then pursue legislative action. But the overall IRP package, especially the May original filing, May IRP, it recognized that uncertainty, and it did an evaluation without the joint participation. And that's why it presented the natural gas combined cycle as a 1,000 to 1,400 megawatt range, depending on which of the scenarios play out. So I think that for the system, for our combined system, that level of capacity would make a lot of sense in a range of scenarios. And I believe the second part of your question was about SMR and partnering with industrials. I do not know the legal analysis for that, but my subjective verification, I believe it may. Owning a power plant with a private entity may require some legislative action, but that I don't have full knowledge of that.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I know you're tired, so I'll go fast. Do you believe Santee Cooper's IRP and your selected preferred supplemental plan evaluated, I guess, all current technologies based on reliability, resilience, and least costs, independent of generation type?
Yes.
We'll make good time if we keep this up. Are retirements of generation facilities based on engineering economic analysis, or is a date simply picked?
So two things in there's the Winya coal retirement that was announced at the time of Santee Cooper reform plan in 2019, and that was backed by an evaluation of what made the most economic sense, and then the board approved the decision to retire that plant. So in the IRP, it retires that plant as at the earliest opportunity possible. And again, it has a lot of strategic value. In addition to the economic value, it's from the resource diversification perspective, it makes a lot of sense for Santee Cooper. It's strategically very important. As Witness McCann's mentioned, about 65 to 70% of our owned capacity right now is coal. So the future we are headed in to begin that diversification is very critical. And we need to increase the flexibility of our system for the level of solar we are bringing on. And solar, combined with the natural gas combined cycle, which is modern and efficient, saves a lot of money. So it's a good economic decision. So that's that's 1,160 megawatts of coal. Then Santee Cooper is left with the cross station, about 2,300 plus megawatts. For the IRP evaluation, we picked, with the stakeholder engagement process, we committed to doing a full coal retirement scenario, early coal retirement, and we picked 2034 as the date cross can be retired at the earliest, so that we could use that assumption to determine what it costs under a range of sensitivities and inform us. And what we learned was by picking that date, cross retirement does not look economic until there is a CO2 regulation. So when you run the CO2 sensitivity, then it makes sense to retire cross. We did commit in this IRP to doing a cross retirement study to do a more full evaluation of looking at a range of options, what you could replace cross with. Are there other better alternatives that could reduce that cost under different assumptions, including the transmission analysis? And that would be included in our next IRP.
All right, so what I think I heard you say is Santee Cooper, you don't haphazardly determine these things, but you study these things.
Yes.
And you do it based on a benefit cost or whatever that.
Absolutely.
So you do not have a stranded asset unnecessarily.
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Just a curiosity question, and I don't know who, if anyone can answer this, but the landfill gas, I kept looking at that, and what's the expected life of that source, and how beneficial is that source?
I don't mind trying to answer that one for you, Commissioner. I would say it's varying. I mean, most of these landfill gas energy facilities that are located at landfills of various sizes at different counties, municipalities, and also private enterprises. So I'm not a landfill expert by any means, but I'm here to testify that we do have these facilities there and located. It's a benefit to the facility. Most of the times, these landfills would be required to flare off their gas that would be coming from the landfill. Santee Cooper has partnered with them over the last, it's been almost 20 years now, of having facilities where we will purchase that gas from the landfill, and then we, instead of just flaring it off and creating, gas in the atmosphere, we're using that to provide electricity to our customers. Depending on the, I say business model, depending on the range of garbage and trash, whether it's coming from local counties or whether it's coming from up and down the East Coast from Miami and New York, may depend on the amount of gas that particular facility may be able to provide and how long it may be able to provide. So, so we've seen varying degrees of output from these facilities over the years. Some continue to produce a great amount of gas, and some struggle. As long as we have those in place with them, we'll continue to honor those contracts, continue to provide that energy to our customers based off of that. Hopefully that was enough to answer your question a little bit. It's hard for me to say without being that particular landfill to know what their output is. So.
I was just kind of curious if it's piped there, if it's pressurized in a tank and you take it somewhere. I just
Yeah, the ones that we currently we currently pull the gas from and purchase and burn. These are facilities that have some kind of a well system, as they call it. They basically draw the gas from the well field that's in place within the cells of the landfill, and then come to a skid, an interface point with Santee Cooper, where we basically take that gas, we clean it up, dry it out, and then we either burn it in a gas engine or a turbine, depending on the size of the facility, to create electricity.
Well, that was just curiosity questions, and I appreciate that. Winyah Station, will it be allowed to operate past 2028 under current environmental permits?
We would have to comply it with the ELG 2020 rule by 2025, and that's the project that's ongoing right now.
But that would be to operate beyond 2028. So
operate beyond 2028. Yes.
Understanding. I wanted to confirm. Thank you. I think this was in your probably rebuttal, Mr. McCants, where you talked about the boiler tube leaks can occur at any time. It's not just temperature related. And there's been some question on I think the coal-fired plants. Have the number of startups for the coal-fired plants, have they increased or decreased?
If you're looking at relatively recent years, I would say they've increased.
Okay. Which I surmised but wasn't sure. So if they've increased, does the increase in number of startup cycles, does that increase the chance of a boiler tube or these boiler tube issues, or does that increase the chance of stuff going bad?
Yes, I would say in general that's one factor that would lead to potential tube leaks, a number of starts. A lot of the tube failures that you'll see in the industry are related to what we consider thermal cycling of that component. Like any metal, metal likes to stay at one temperature and stay there. And so when you either bring a unit online or offline, or you increase the output and then decrease it through cycles of the day or cycles during the week, the temperatures do change variably on those tube components in that boiler, and that does, as one factor, does increase the likelihood of potential failures there left unmitigated.
And the coal plant, as a base load facility, it would tend to run more consistently and uniformly over time. Is that the best way for those to be used, or no?
Well, I would say traditionally all coal-fired generation in this country was designed to be base load units. Most of our units were designed and put into place, starting with, Winyah in the 70s, Cross in the 80s and 90s, and even early 2000s. And there were periods of time over the last several decades where those did operate as base load units. I would say since the natural gas prices continue to decline, what was that, maybe the early second decade of this millennial, so 2012-ish or so, the gas prices started to come down where our gas resources started to dispatch more often. That was at a trade, what we call fuel switching in the industry, where you switch from one fuel to another. In this case, predominantly across the country, a lot of folks have switched from coal to natural gas, which has caused those once traditional baseload coal units to be operated, I think I've used the term in my testimony, as intermediary. So somewhere between the 20 to 80% capacity factor for that unit. And, capacity factor only tells kind of one story. You can get to a certain capacity factor a few different ways. For example, some units may run at half load all the time and have a 50% capacity factor, or they may run at full load 50% of the time and have the same capacity factor. So depending on the location, the facility, the system that it operates in, it's not just a Santee Cooper issue that we've had to face. It's been an industry issue where we've had to be innovative in the way that we've operated coal-fired generation in this country, going from traditional baseload operation to more intermediate operation where units cycle more often, they start more often. One of the things that we've done, as well as some of our neighbors, have also been to try to reduce the minimum load of a unit that it can operate at. So instead of having to take that unit offline at night, for example, when the demand is down, we can operate that unit at lower loads through the night so that it mitigates having to take it offline and bring it back online, and it's still now available the next morning for peak. I think there's other neighbors who are operating similar coal-fired units in the same way, and we do that as well sometimes in our system when needs arise.
Thank you. And there's been some discussion about battery facility. I think Ms. Clancy was talking to you about the, I guess, batteries being compared and comparison at one of the sites, and right now it escapes me, but it caused me to wonder about the comparison of replacing a baseload facility, which I think, Mr. Dimbler, that was you that she was talking to. I can't recall exactly. And you were talking about a 24-hour generation facility versus a 4-hour battery facility. And that really got me thinking about that. Like, I was kind of curious, you know, how, and if you can't answer, I understand, but how do you evaluate that? Is it 25% of that, or is that something yet to be done? I was just curious how that is evaluated.
Commissioner, something yet to be done in greater detail, but there would be, if you are trying to replace a 1,000 megawatt 24-hour generating station which provides winter capacity but transmission support as needed, and you replace it with a 4-hour battery, there would be some overbuild needed. It may not be 4 times. That depends on the hourly projections. And I think one thing we've clearly identified in our IRP, a limitation, is that the modeling software, hourly modeling software, it's not. I think it produces portfolios with batteries and other resources, but there is a need to do a separate study, sub-hourly study, on how a portfolio with heavy intermittent renewable resources and limited duration batteries would perform, and like take it to that next level. I think this combined with the issues that I believe Commissioner Thomas was raising about the risks of batteries, we think the appropriate thing to do is to pursue the pilot project that Witness Wagner was talking about, that we mentioned in our IRP, that I think batteries would be on our system sooner rather than later if load materializes. But even if not, I think there is some urgency to doing a smaller pilot project, so we can, because we know the future is coming, and it would require us to build more batteries and other resources quickly, and to learn all these things and integrate them with our control center and dispatch them and learn not only from more studies that we will do, but from the practical implementation side of it, and we plan to do so.
Okay, and that kind of thinking about I think your Myrtle Beach and Hilton Head CT units. That when does Santee Cooper expect to, I guess, replace or have a replacement plan for those?
That's also identified in the IRP as, I believe, 2034, but that was merely an assumption, subject to verification. What we committed to doing was, there are steps in the coordination agreement when we retire or plan to retire units to go through a process and work with Central on that. So I think another short-term action plan item that we identified was to do a retirement study for the Myrtle Beach and Hilton Head resources. Again, it would require the resource planning team going to the transmission planning group and creating scenarios for them of what it could be. It could be replaced with like CTs. It could be replaced with off-system resources or batteries, and then what the transmission analysis of that would be, and that information will be taken in that retirement analysis to come up with an optimal solution for inclusion in the subsequent IRP.
Would those units be more for, I guess, to offset any intermittency issues, or is that just for just additional capacity, or?
I think the replacement of those CTs is primarily just because of the condition they're in and their age. Is that fair to say? I'm looking at witness McCants, Hilton Head, Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, I mean, Hilton Head and Myrtle Beach are, I think in my testimony I provided some dates on when those were commissioned and put into service, and those are obviously some of them in the 50s, some 60s, so those, the vintage of those units, you know, more than just operation, sometimes the older or something else like that, it's hard to get replacement parts, and it's hard to maintain that level due to that. So there's obviously some different resources that could be placed to replace those units, and like Raul or Ms. Dimla said, those options are things yet to be studied. They do provide a very critical service, though, I think, to our customers, where the placement of those facilities are located in Hilton Head and Myrtle Beach near our load centers. They're very, very much required and needed during the times of high load days, whether it be during the summer or during the winter, and provide valuable resources for voltage support and other means of those services. So I think, you know, contemplation of how to go about retiring them is something that definitely needs to be studied from a transmission perspective, very critically, because it will have, they do play a big reliability function for Santee Cooper and for serving our customers when they're needed, for sure.
I had one more question, but I just thought of something that I think you had mentioned earlier about the freezing and the heat tape and this kind of stuff. And I wasn't sure I caught it all. Did you say that the thermostat was working fine, the heat tape was working fine, but the thermostat it wasn't in the ambient, it wasn't able to detect the ambient temperature because it was protected or had a windscreen or something like that? Is that?
Yeah, no, that's right, Commissioner. Part of our winter prep season that we just basically went through here prior to December 1st, we consider our winter season December 1st through, even though we all know we experienced a little bit of a cold snap a little ahead of that time this year. But our folks go through and identify critical components, particularly, you know, on these large boilers. They're high up in the air. They're 100, 200 feet high, obviously open up to wind. So one of the things we do is we go around and identify those areas. We build wind breaks, whether with sheet metal, engineered solutions, or whether it may be sometimes just plastic and things of different sorts to try to create an envelope, if you will, to break the wind and also keep heat in. So we may put a heater, for example, around a critical instrument, the sensing lines, the transmitters, those types of things are most susceptible to freezing temperatures. They're small little lines that carry water, steam, for example, so they're susceptible to freezing if you don't have the proper mitigation measures in place. So in that case, there was a shelter built around that particular thermostat that was controlling that. So it was seeing warm temperature as opposed to seeing the outside temperature at the time, and so that led to the issue that we had, particularly on that one case.
So I take it Santee Cooper learned a lot of valuable lessons in this storm.
We certainly did. We always take lessons learned and apply them to the next time. And in this particular case, we have walked down every thermostat on that unit and made sure that there's no other issues going into this winter, and that one should be behind us and taken care of.
Good, thank you. And I probably don't know the answer to this. I don't. But just out of curiosity, Santee Cooper can issue revenue bonds, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't have taxing authority. Can't do general obligation bonds, can you?
We do not.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I have no more questions.
Thank you.
Chair Belser.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. It's good to see you. I am going to ask a whole host of questions, and I certainly welcome whoever can answer it best to do so, or tell me if there's somebody in the back of the room that will be better able to answer it later on. So, you've had a lot of questions about WINYA and 111 and ELG. I guess my follow-up question, and you may have kind of already had this, but what do we think the range is for when the 111 rule will be determined?
It is my understanding, Commissioner, that by middle of the year, by 2024, um, what I do not have a grasp on is that what happens if there is then some kind of a challenge, legal challenge, then it might delay things.
Don't we all wish we knew that kind of thing? Are there other environmental rules that are being considered that could have an influence on Winyah and Cross that we haven't talked about?
I cannot think of any right now besides the greenhouse gas and then the proposed ESG 2023 that came up. That's the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I may just add, I mean, nothing substantive. I mean, there's all kinds of rules that we have to continue to follow and make sure that there's no development that impacts these generating stations. I think, you know, we've most realistically complied with the CCR rules at the generating stations, particularly the coal-fired generating stations, the coal combustion and residual rule. That rule continues to have some things that come down the line that we're mostly about how we deal with the legacy impoundments, coal ash impoundments at those facilities. But as far as any kind of future generation and things that we would need equipment needed to add in order to comply or scrub certain processes or chemicals, I think it's fair to say that the ELG and GHG rules are the ones of major concern at this point.
Okay. And Vice Chair Powers was asking you about offshore wind, and I was curious what you knew about the South Carolina BOEM process and how that influences when offshore wind might become more of a player. And BOEM is the Bureau of Ocean Energy.
Yes.
Okay.
I have limited recollection of that. I believe there was a auction at some point, and how I understand it is in those auctions, either utilities or private entities can bid in and buy those rights. I think I'm not sure what the outcome of the South Carolina auction was, but it is my understanding that it's off the coast of South Carolina. It's not very economic unless you get way north towards North Carolina.
Well, I noticed you have a time frame, and I don't remember it now, maybe 2040 for beginning to look at offshore. How did you determine 2040 was the right year, or whatever that year was? Don't hold me to that number.
Commissioner, when we were developing assumptions for the resource options, this would be last year before our analytics phase. We did decide, not late in the game, but once we had the traditional resources and renewables, we decided to look at wind, onshore and offshore wind. And I recall that the team consulted with some developers, wind developers, to get insights and assumptions. And these are the kind of developers who would have expertise about the auctions and that could provide that insight to us through the pricing they offered. So I think based on input from them about feasibility and cost, I think the team made a reasonable assumption of when it should be assumed in the long-term study, and that appeared reasonable at the time. Yes, please.
So, Commissioner, there's also DOE initiatives underway to talk through or to work through the we'll call it transmission infrastructure, the underwater transmission infrastructure to get from these fields back to points of interconnection to the system, different systems along the East Coast. The timelines that we have link up pretty well with the timelines that are showing up now. All of that happened after the fact, right? We can't take credit for seeing that, but they line up pretty well with a lot of those the target dates for a lot of that infrastructure to be in place. A lot of those DOE studies really, for good reason, focus more north of South Carolina and the Northeast. The southern regions are, I guess, a little bit later in the development process, but that 2040 date it aligns fairly well with some of the output of those studies.
Did Santee Cooper have a pilot program associated with offshore wind?
We have done some studies in the past, looking at, wind potential, both onshore and offshore in the Myrtle Beach area.
And does that inform your
I
data?
think, I think some of it can inform the data that we could use, but, you know, as far as viability, cost, timeframes, yeah.
But not the year,
Not the
the
year,
estimated years?
that's right.
Okay. And then the 100 megawatt onshore wind, where did that estimate come from? Is that what you're seeing already, or?
Is that the limit on annually how much wind can?
Yes, that's what I meant to be asking about.
Commissioner, I believe witness John Painter will be able to explain that in more detail. We had a lot of discussions about the appropriate constraints on solar, and similar analysis was done by witness Painter based on his expertise to come up with that constraint.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot of my questions have been answered, but, and this one may have been answered. Had the number of startups for coal-fired power plants increased or decreased over the past few years? And that may have been one that Commissioner Caston asked.
Yes, Commissioner, I think it was, but yes, it has increased. I say generally speaking, across the board for coal-fired generation.
And that's where you all were talking about the impact of metal and wearability. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Are the Myrtle Beach CTs dual fuel?
No, ma'am. They run off of diesel fuel, distillate fuel.
And are they, the Myrtle Beach and the Hilton Head, important for kind of a black start circumstance?
So they're black start capable, but they're not part of our black start plan. They just do their location and the orientation of the transmission with respect to the units they would start. Just doesn't make sense. It's a viable alternative plan if we needed one, but they're not part of our base.
So you have other resources that are.
We have other ways to tackle the black start issue. That's correct.
And there's been a little bit of conversation about small nuclear reactors, but where does Santee Cooper stand on considering those?
Commissioner, I believe it's in our resource mix as an option starting 2040. I believe we are very interested in the technology maturing, and some we may not be the first mover in it, but we're going to track it carefully. I think we are to industry's benefit. We are hoping for it to be transformational. But I think one of the SMR's projects that was supposed to come online first was recently canceled because of cost concerns. But I also am hearing talks about commitments from the federal government to set goals to triple nuclear capacity in this country by 2050. So I think we'll be monitoring these. If that comes with incentives, that may impact the cost, all-in cost, and then it may impact when it shows up in our resource plans. So we are interested in it. We'll be carefully monitoring it.
Do you have witness Hyatt's surrebuttal testimony? And where I'm going with this is there a list of items that you've adjusted in the addendum, and then there are other items that are identified as future IRP. So you may not need to look at it, but basically there are, and if you've got it, it's page 3 and 4 in his surrebuttal testimony. And while you're looking, my question is more general, which is in his testimony, it's identified as future IRP. And my question really is, I guess I have two questions. One is, that could mean anything. Does future IRP mean next year in an annual update? Does it mean in 3 years when you're coming with major updates? That's the first question.
Yes, so, Commissioner Williams, I do not have that in front of me, but I recall the 7 recommendations. There were 4, I believe, that were recommended to be addressed right now, and 7 that should be discussed with stakeholders. So it depends. My response is that on all of those recommendations, when we begin discussions with stakeholders, we would provide transparently an update of where things are, and it depends on the status of things and the timing. So, for example, this is just an example for the GHG 111 rule. If the rule has been finalized,
Right.
it would likely become a base case assumption, whatever form it's in, and if it's still, and I would use the same innings phrase. If it continues in the 7th inning, then we would have to at some point decide that it needs to be addressed as a sensitivity, and then we'd work with stakeholders to tell them what assumptions we are making, seek their feedback, and then include it appropriately. But I believe that all 7 assumptions from my recollection were topics that need to be addressed within the next IRP cycle. These are not 6 years away. These are issues that need to be dealt with through annual updates or the triennial IRP filing, depending on the state they're in.
Might we see some of them sooner? And I know you're not looking at the list. I could read them to you, but I don't think it's that's that key.
Yes, Commissioner. Yes, we can. At a minimum, in our annual update, we'll provide a full analysis of where things stand with all those recommendations.
That sounds really good.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
And you almost anticipated my next question, which is how robust or what do you expect of those discussions with the stakeholders on those particular, the 7 remaining items?
I would, as an example, Commissioner, I think we have, our team will now, after this process of the 23 IRP, or while we are in it, we'll now finalize a schedule and figure out how the several studies that need to be done, how they should be laid out over the next 2 or 3 years, and which of them are the highest priority to accomplish in the next year. And we'll then present that schedule and plan in one of our initial stakeholder meetings and seek feedback that the stakeholders agree that those are the right priorities. So I think it would be robust and it would be transparent. I think there will be some limitations in terms of resources of how much we are able to do within the next year, because some of these studies, such as the cross-retirement, would be fairly time-consuming. And some of the studies which are, intermittent renewables penetration, how they perform in extreme weather event, I think we'll have to work with our consultants to define the scope, and that scope would tell us how long that study would take. So once we have that, we can then lay it out and figure out which we think are the highest priority, which is most informative to the next IRP cycle. So we're going to do things with urgency, but we'll have to do some resource loading, scheduling to figure that out. But we will provide an update to the stakeholders and the commission in the next annual update.
Okay, thank you. I know that my questions are now for you, Mr. Dembla, and I appreciate all the answers to date, but you talked some about the short-term elements of the IRP and the long-term. It's kind of getting at the question I was getting at just then in terms of, how do we move forward? But it's really about how do you address the short-term and how do you address the long-term? And I guess I'm particularly thinking about how you do that related to the natural gas combined cycle plant that's being considered. It's kind of a big, broad question. I'm not going to give you any more details than that to go from.
No, that's fair, Commissioner. I think that the what we are trying to accomplish with this IRP is make progress, press forward. I mentioned that a big strategic importance for Santee Cooper, besides having the capacity in place to reliably serve our customers, meet the the economic development load and the reserve margin needs. In addition to that is the resource diversification, to responsibly diversify away some of the coal exposure, and put ourselves on a path to a future where more coal may need to be retired. So what the IRP has done is, so with that goal in mind, I think the IRP tries to solve for these 40-year periods and then identify a short-term plan. And then the big exercise or a big objective is the short-term plan. Whatever actions we take, will that be robust? Will it put us on the path that the subsequent 35 or 37 years of planning can change, but those decisions would still be good? And the IRP attempted to demonstrate that. It said that if you take these portfolio strategies, if you solve for the economically optimized portfolio, or if you try to even head towards a net zero portfolio, what does the model solve for? And it told us that a natural gas combined cycle and a solar implementation makes sense in almost every scenario. So I think that the short-term action plan, again, to answer your question, that analytical exercise gives us comfort that those decisions are going to put us on the path to any future and will perform in most of the range of assumptions that we have tested.
This next question, thank you. This next question may be one that you need to ask me to hold for somebody else, or you may want to tackle it. This is AD 13 from the supplement. This is in Figure 2. You all are talking about peak demand and then the sources over the years. I wanted to hear you talk some about how the dashed peak demand line was defined. And, for example, when I try to run over to the left-hand side, I see a little less than 5,500 megawatts. And then when I go to the other side and pull a ruler over, I get a little over 6,000 megawatts. There's probably somewhere else where it's more intelligently shared with me in your IRP, but I am asking for kind of an overview of just talking about Figure 2, where the peak demand came from, the change that it shows over 2023 to 2042, less about the sources. That was clearer to me.
Okay, so just the process of developing that line. Yes.
And what it says.
Okay. So that's our base load forecast that Witness McCormick will discuss in a subsequent panel. It is the process is that we Witness McCormick works with outside consultants, GDS, to develop projections for our service territory, and then Central does the same for 70% being 65-70% of our load. They have a robust process of developing load forecast, working with all their co-op participants and going and visiting them. And then they get together with the Santee Cooper team, and throughout the year, a beginning part of the year, generally from starting in January of a year through May, they have several discussions to compare assumptions and then come up with a combined load forecast. So that's the process. It's pretty robust. It's worked pretty well over the past few years. But this is the first IRP, I would say, or the first planning cycle in the past 3 or 4 years where we see the biggest upside risk to this load forecast. So I would say the annual growth in this, and I'm subject to verification from Witness McCormick, will be sub 1%. It's not very steep increase. But there is a recognition.
What was that percentage again?
I said sub 1%. It's
okay.
Not again, subject to confirmation. It might be around that 1% range, if that. But I think in this IRP, we recognized that this is the base load forecast, and there is significant upside risk to this load forecast. So it's in our planning, it was tested against how the portfolio, especially the short-term action plan, would perform in a high load case. We tested a high load and a low load case. In the low load case, you're generally testing that, hey, there'd be no stranded costs. But in the high load case, you need to make sure that you would be able to add other resources on top of the preferred plan for the base load forecast. And the mix of those resources still makes sense based on the short-term action plan in the preferred portfolio. So a long-winded way of saying that even though this is the base load forecast, this is the first time we paid a lot more attention to the high load forecast case.
I think that is it, Chair Belzer. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioners, further questions for this panel? Good afternoon, gentlemen. Other than I think it was 90 megawatts with Rainy, and that sounded more like an uprate to me. Are there any other expansions being considered for Rainy? Additional units, I think is what I'm talking about when I'm saying additional expansions.
Besides the one expansion potential that Witness McCants mentioned, which was the adding a heat recovery system to Rainy and converting the CTs to a combined cycle unit, which would give us approximately 200 megawatts.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but somewhere.
Yeah, I believe it's in the
there.
200 megawatt range. That's another potential we will explore this year. But that 200 megawatts is subject to confirmation. That's my recollection, Commissioner.
And I think I understood, and this may have been through, it was either Sierra Club's witness or say CCL witness. Were the inputs as far as coal retirements in the models, those were selected by an input by Santee Cooper, or were those allowed to fall out of the modeling?
It was input into the model.
Okay, all of them. I mean, I understand the 2028. That's in the statute. Mm-hmm. The 2028 retirement by Rainy of Winyall.
Right.
But even the 2030.
For the 2028 was in the statute, and it was because it was found to be impractical to have replacement generation
by then.
And by then, it was pushed out to the next earliest possible date as an assumption in the preferred portfolio.
Okay. Why did Santee Cooper decide to input those and not allow retirement dates to fall out or be selected by the model? Let me put it that way.
Commissioner, I believe Witness Davis would explain the modeling nuances of this, but I would say from Santee Cooper's perspective, I think our goal is to again begin that diversification and do retire some coal, Vinya coal, as soon as we can have enough capacity in place to meet the reserve margin requirement. So I think it's a risky proposition for Santee Cooper to enter and remain in the mid-2030s next decade with 3,600 megawatts of coal and we have very little gas exposure compared to neighboring utilities. So I think to fix that resource mix and have more diversity in our portfolio is I think it's very important for us and to have the appropriate risk mitigation for our customers.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, anything further for this panel? Mr. Cooper, any redirect?
Chair Belzer, we have no redirect. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you.
I came to the podium because it was rare.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony and your appearance here today. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Next panel.
And Chair Belzer, understand the admonition you give, but could the witnesses be excused subject to recall?
At your peril.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Chair Belzer, Santee Cooper calls Greg McCormick and Jake Thomas to the stand.
Thank you, gentlemen. Please come up. Scratching.
Would you please raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you.
Mr. McCormick, will you please state your name for the record? And by whom are you employed?
Just a second. Let him get set. And would you turn that microphone on, please, sir?
Oh.
Thank you.
And by whom are you employed in what capacity?
I'm employed by Santee Cooper as the Senior Manager of Financial Forecast.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 11 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on July 14th, 2023 in this docket?
I have.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit labeled as Direct Exhibit GM-1 that was previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Could you please tell us what that change is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, on page 24 of the exhibit, there is a typo. The figure 20 is listed as winter peak, and it should be listed as summer peak, and that's in megawatts. And then exhibit 21 is listed as summer peak, and it should be winter peak in megawatts.
And I think it was figure 21, right? Not exhibit 21.
Yes. I'm sorry, yes.
No problem. Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibit of Mr. McCormick be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. McCormick's pre-filed direct testimony will be admitted as if given from the stand. Mr. McCormick's exhibit GM-1, as corrected from the stand, will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 5 and received into the evidence of this case. Do y'all plan to file a corrected exhibit with noting those corrections?
We're happy to do that.
Please do.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Mr. McCormick, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes.
Would you please deliver that summary at this time?
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. In my direct testimony, I provide an overview of the load forecasting process, a summary of the load forecast provided in the 2023 IRP, and information about the high and low case forecast used for scenarios in the IRP. The IRP relies on the 2022 forecast, which covers the period from 2022 through 2042. Santee Cooper's load forecast is created by combining several class-level forecasts, namely the direct serve residential and commercial classes, the direct serve industrial class, sales to central, and municipal and off-system sales. Our consultant, GDS Associates, develops the base direct serve residential and commercial forecast using statistically adjusted end-use modeling, and Santee Cooper's load forecast team layers post-modeling adjustments for future electric vehicle, rooftop solar, and DSM impacts to the base forecast GDS provides. Santee Cooper internally develops the direct serve industrial forecast using historical data and in consultation with our customers. Central, whose load comprises 60 to 70% of the total system load, develops their own load forecast using similar methods to Santee Cooper and provides their results for incorporation into the Santee Cooper forecast. Santee Cooper and Central work closely throughout the process and meet several times each year to compare assumptions, review each other's preliminary results, share information, and discuss final results. Municipal and off-system sales represent wholesale sales to various municipalities or agencies served through contracts with Santee Cooper. These agencies provide their own forecast when possible, and Santee Cooper develops a forecast for smaller customers who do not provide their own by using a similar approach as for our direct serve residential and commercial class. The 2022 load forecast indicates average annual system growth of both energy and peak demand at an annualized compound rate of 0.5% through 2042 due to strong residential customer growth, which offsets declining use per customer expectations and the termination of certain municipal and off-system sales contracts. For the high and low load cases, GDS stochastically forecasts Santee Cooper's direct serve residential and commercial system impacts by varying economic data and household count, and Santee Cooper uses the 90th and 10th percentile outcomes for the high and low load cases, respectively. Central uses a similar methodology. Santee Cooper also prepares a high electric vehicle adoption case and a high adoption distributed solar case and simulates changes in the industrial load on the combined Santee Cooper and Central systems in the high and low load cases by assuming 5% of all South Carolina industrial electric load is added or removed from the system. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Mr. Thomas, please state your name for the record.
Jacob Thomas.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am a principal of GDS Associates Incorporated.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 13 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on July 14th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit labeled as Direct Exhibit JMT-1 that was previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
No.
Chair Belzer, at this time I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibit of Mr. Thomas be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Thomas will be admitted as if given from the stand. The pre-filed exhibit from Mr. Thomas that is noted as JMT1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 6 and accepted into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Thomas, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please deliver that summary at this time?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair Belser and members of the Commission. In my direct testimony, I discuss elements of Santee Cooper's load forecast, which were prepared by GDS Associates Incorporated under my supervision. These elements include the long-term load forecast for Santee Cooper's retail, residential, and commercial accounts, Santee Cooper's peak demand forecast, the long-term load forecast for one of Santee Cooper's municipal customers, and the range forecast for Santee Cooper's residential and commercial loads. Peak demand projections were derived from an econometric model that specifies peak demand as a function of the underlying trend in the Santee Cooper energy forecast and peak day weather. Santee Cooper coincident peak demand is projected to grow at 0.7% per year. GDS was also responsible for forecasting energy sales to the city of Bamberg, which has seen population decline at least since 1990, and which has historically seen little growth or decline in energy sales. GDS developed a basic multiple linear regression model to project Bamberg energy sales, which includes a variable to capture impacts of COVID-19 on energy sales in 2020 and 2021. To develop the range forecast for Santee Cooper's load, GDS developed a Monte Carlo simulation model to produce range forecast for Santee Cooper's authority load. The Monte Carlo approach is a statistical method which can be used to produce a probability distribution of possible outcomes based on a set of inputs whose values will vary within the simulations. Santee Cooper used the 90th percentile and 10th percentile cases from the simulation to represent high and low case scenarios for loads. Regarding Central's load forecast, the two utilities met at least 3 times while Santee Cooper's and Central's forecasts were being independently developed. These meetings allowed both parties to share information with respect to methodologies, data sources, and forecast outputs generally. I attended those meetings and concluded that Central makes use of industry best practices and data sources, and that Central is taking care to develop a reasonable forecast that Santee Cooper can rely on. This concludes my summary.
Chair Belzer, at this time, the panel is available for cross-examination and questions by the Commission.
Thank you. We've been going a little over an hour and a half, so let's, or about an hour and a half. Let's take a 10-minute break. We will return at 3:55. Thank you. Gentlemen, you're already Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission as we continue in the hearing in docket number 2023-154E concerning the 2023 Comprehensive Integrated Resource Plan filed by the Public Service Authority of South Carolina. We are on cross-examination of a panel and recognize Sierra Club.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon, panel. My name is Isabella Ariza, and I represent the Sierra Club in this proceeding. Mr. McCormick, could I refer you to your exhibit GM1, page 15? Could you confirm whether figure 13, titled Electric Vehicle Impact Forecast, includes time of use rates to manage load?
The figure 13 on page 15 does not include time of use. That is the base forecast. We do make an adjustment of approximately 70% for DSM-related activities that is transferred to our load forecast.
Okay, thank you. Would you agree that those time of use rates are a tool that Santee Cooper could use to shift the EV load off peak?
Potentially.
And in this IRP, Santee Cooper did not include programs that would allow, for example, school districts to use school bus batteries as grid energy storage assets, correct?
We did not model explicitly electric vehicles being used as batteries for the grid. What we did do in our high adoption solar case was we paired all of the new solar installations with a 20 kW battery, and that was how we modeled distributed battery storage.
Okay, thank you. A couple of final questions. Is Santee Cooper projecting a significant additional load from the build-out of EV manufacturing in South Carolina in the next 5 years?
Of manufacturing, are you referring to industrial customers on our system?
Yes.
Our industrial forecast is based on our current customers that we have on our system. We don't project new industrial customers unless they have some sort of a signed commitment with Santee Cooper. Central has a similar process for their forecast. In our high load scenario, we add approximately 400 megawatts of generic future industrial.
So I assume this would be the same for data centers? Is Santee Cooper projecting significant additional load from data center build-out in South Carolina?
The answer would be the same.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Oh, I've lost my list. Sasiba.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, my name is John Burns. I'm General Counsel of CCEBA, Carolina's Clean Energy Business Association. I just have a couple of questions for you. Are you familiar with testimony recently filed in Duke Energy's IRP proceedings in both North and South Carolina where Duke substantially revised upward its load forecast?
I've heard briefly of it, but I'm not familiar with it.
Are you familiar, so you're not familiar with the testimony, but are you aware that Georgia Power has also increased during the pendency of its IRP, its load forecast due to economic development in the Southeast being higher than expected?
I was not aware of that.
Okay, so what happens to your load forecast if economic development results in more demand than expected in the Southeast, and particularly in your territory?
Are you asking if we would revise our load forecast?
Yes, would you revise it? You're a little hard to hear.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Before the chair asked you, I'll make sure you're talking to the microphone.
Yes, if something significant were to change, we would revise our load forecast, yes.
And you would you expect then for the system to need additional resources to meet that revised load based upon the testimony of other witnesses today?
I'm certainly not an expert in that, okay, but I would assume.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Century Aluminum of South Carolina?
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy?
No questions.
Thank you. Central Electric Power Cooperative?
No questions.
Thank you. Santee Cooper Industrial Customer Group?
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Google LLC?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for this panel? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. So, Mr. McCormick, I know you heard the question earlier, so I'll go ahead and ask, but I think you answer it on page 8, line 19, in connection with how do you treat the municipal and off-system customers, and you state in there that you don't have an obligation to serve once those contracts expire. But do you have any experience with that in the past? They expire and they don't renew or don't want to renew? I'm just trying to figure out, how does this play realistically into the load forecast on a go-forward basis?
Yeah, and I believe witness Dembla answered similarly to the way I would. Santee Cooper does not have an obligation after those contracts terminate, and so what we would do is at that time, Santee Cooper would make a decision if we would like to serve that load in the future and what it might take. And so we don't want to put that assumption into our base forecast because that's a decision that would need to be made at a later time. What we do include in our base forecast would be any customers that have an evergreen contract with Santee Cooper, so a contract that doesn't have a set termination date, and those are in our forecast in perpetuity.
And so at a high level, what kind of customers are these?
Are the municipal and off-system customers?
Yeah.
We have Alabama Municipal Electric Authority. There's the city of Waynesville in North Carolina, the town of Bamberg, the city of Georgetown, and then the city of Seneca.
So none of them are like large industrial customers or anything like that in the state of South Carolina. It is municipal, but just kind of happens that some of them are outside South Carolina, I think is what I'm hearing.
That's right, yeah. So for Santee Cooper in this context, municipal means a municipality that owns their own distribution system, and so they take power from Santee Cooper to resell that to the end-use customers. So those cities or joint action agencies may have their own industrial customers, but we would not be directly serving them.
But in the event that when those contracts reach their sunset time frame, then they could potentially kind of be in a spot where they might not have real good options to get power from somewhere else. Would you agree with that?
I would say we don't have an obligation to serve them. I don't know how they would proceed at that point if they were unable to find another power supplier.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, further questions?
Couple questions.
Commissioner Caston?
Thank you. And this is probably for you too, Mr. McCormick. I think Mr. Burns asked you some questions about demand load growth projections and such. And you may have already answered this, but has Santee Cooper's load forecast changed significantly since, I guess, your previous RFP?
I'm not familiar with the details of the load forecast in the prior IRP. I would not believe so.
Has the methodology or any of the inputs, anything changed?
We would have redone all of the assumptions and reviewed the outputs. Absent some changes to industrial customers or things like that, the methodology would be very similar. I believe the results would be very similar.
But if I recall from your testimony relative to, I think I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, the demand side rather than just population projections. I think commercial was like 0.4% and the total was 0.7% demand increase through 2041. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
Now, as far as the population projections, as far as the growth in the area, it's at a greater rate than that, correct?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you like me to elaborate? Would it be helpful?
Absolutely.
When we're talking about Santee Cooper's direct service territory, the way I try to think about the load forecast is sort of our customer base. And so Myrtle Beach historically has been a tourism industry. And so the population that's come in has been tourism support, and the businesses that have been stood up over the past have been tourism support type industries. So large hotels maybe is something that you might think of. Over the past several years, Myrtle Beach has transitioned a little bit into a retiree community. And so there has been a trend towards smaller houses. There's been a trend towards communities to support that. And there's also been a trend towards smaller commercial to support those retirees' needs as well. So potentially a small doctor's office type thing, as opposed to the larger hotels of the past. And so we're seeing a declining use per customer on our commercial side based on a changing, I'll say demographic, but that's probably not the right word, of the commercial customer class.
All right, you're saying primarily the commercial as far as residential. Certainly that number's going up, but you're saying it's...
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. So residential, we are projecting a significant amount of customer growth in Santee Cooper's service territory. There's a lot of migration into the state and into Santee Cooper's service territory. I believe Central would tell you the same thing for their service territory. Some of that, and Witness Thomas can speak better to it, some of that customer growth is being offset, like I said, by smaller houses that potentially use less energy, and then also by energy efficiencies and things of that nature that lead to a declining use per customer, offsetting the increased customers.
Because I've asked something similar of the other utilities too, because and I do think I recall Duke saying recently, maybe in the last year or two, I don't know, since the last IRP, that their demand numbers are higher than projected. But that said, the general demand had been relatively flat despite population growing at a higher rate. And I've basically asked, is that because, do you think, of the more ubiquitous nature of just simply energy efficient everything? Light bulbs, HVAC, appliances?
I believe that's true. Witness Thomas maybe can answer a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yes, the specifically with respect to the residential class, our modeling shows, assumes, and demonstrates that the typical home consumption has been declining, is expected to continue to decline for some time, and it's due to increased efficiency. You have folks that are, even without changes in federal codes and standards, you have folks that are replacing old equipment with more efficient equipment. And so the average efficiency on the system is increasing, which is going to bring down sales per household. And so the only way to get growth in the residential sector in total energy sales is by increasing the number of customers.
Agreed. Thank you. Well, I'm not saying I agree with what you said. I mean, good enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's good for now. I think the other questions along those lines would probably be for your relative to the efficiency and DSM and all that stuff. Would that be for Mr. Wintermantle or one of the other witnesses, or would that be you?
No, I believe that would be Witness Altman would probably be best to answer those.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. I'm going to replow a little bit of that just to see if I understand and ask in another way. So you talk about planning on annual growth of 0.7%. Is that correct overall?
That's the compound annual.
Okay.
Yes.
How does that relate to what you described in Myrtle Beach, which, and maybe you've already answered it, even though they're growing much faster, they're growing with smaller units and smaller use? Is that what you're testifying to?
That's right, yes. So what's happening at the broader system level, our distribution system, our residential, commercial, direct served in Myrtle Beach is growing at those rates that you described. We also have some of those off-system and municipal customers leaving the system. So that's offsetting some of that growth. And then we also do not project future industrial growth of any sort of a natural means. And so that's relatively flat as well. And so those items are really what's taking that forecast down.
Okay. And circling back to Attorney Burns's questions, what will trigger your analyzing whether whether there's a different estimate out there? You said you'll do it, but what would be the trigger? Is it next year? Is it in 3 years?
Yeah.
Is it tomorrow?
So I'll take an attempt at it, and please let me know if I don't answer your question. Santee Cooper does a load forecast every year. And so at the beginning of next year, we'll begin another load forecast, and we'll start working with Central on developing the assumptions for that load forecast. Given the amount of economic development potential in the state right now as well, Santee Cooper and Central have been communicating closely to figure out if a large load says, or decides to make a financial commitment or sign a service agreement or something to where that large load would be something we'd want to include in our load forecast, we would make a revision at that time as well.
And is that in time for the annual update?
It could be, yes, ma'am.
Is that a commitment that Santee Cooper could make?
It would be very dependent on when those customers decide to make that financial commitment or when they have their service agreement. We will certainly have another load forecast with base assumptions, but any changes to our industrial class or things like that would be based on.
Now, that's what I meant. Your load assumptions, will they be incorporated in your annual update next year?
Yes, we will have a new load forecast, yes.
Okay. Sorry, that wasn't clear, but
That's
that's
okay.
all I was asking. Thank you. No further questions.
Commissioners, anything further for this panel? Hearing none. Ms. Brazil, any redirect?
No redirect.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your appearance and your testimony today. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next panel.
Chair Belzer, we call Andrew Altman and Jim Herndon.
Would you please raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Altman, please state your name for the record.
That microphone is not on. Thank you.
Andrew Altman.
And by whom are you employed in what capacity?
Santee Cooper as the Senior Manager of Conservation and Energy Efficiency.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 9 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on July 14, 2023 in this docket?
I have.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit labeled as Direct Exhibit AWA-1 that was previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket.
That's correct.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
I do not.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibit of Mr. Altman be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Altman's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand. Mr. Altman's pre-filed direct exhibit AWA-1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 1 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Altman, have you also prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision rebuttal testimony of 3 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on October 27th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes, I have.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Altman be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Altman's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Altman, have you prepared a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony?
I have.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. In my direct testimony, I discussed Santee Cooper's legacy, current, and future DSM program offerings as outlined in the IRP. Santee Cooper has been providing DSM programs to its direct serve retail customers since the early 1980s. In 2009, Santee Cooper launched a new reduce the use portfolio of energy efficiency programs for its residential and commercial customers. This portfolio was very successful and achieved 209 gigawatt hours of cost-effective cumulative energy efficiency savings over the 9-year period stretching from 2009 to 2018. In 2019, Santee Cooper refreshed and rebranding the existing portfolio of energy efficiency programs and created Empower SC to market energy efficiency as well as other residential and commercial customer-facing programs at Santee Cooper, including DR, solar, and beneficial electrification. Empower SC now includes 3 main offerings of DSM programs: Empower Home, Empower Business, and Empower Smart Rewards. Empower Home programs encourage builders of new homes and owners of existing homes to install equipment and implement other energy savings measures that exceed the efficiency required by current codes and standard market practices. The Empower Business commercial program also focuses on equipment with high energy usage in commercial settings, offering rebates for retrofitting existing lighting to higher efficiency types of lighting, installing high efficiency commercial HVAC equipment, and implementing refrigeration efficiency measures. Smart Rewards, a demand response switch program launched in 2022, allows Santee Cooper to activate a switch on participating customers' all-electric HVAC and or electric water heaters to cycle usage during periods of high demand for electricity when utility resources are constrained. In 2022, Santee Cooper retained Resource Innovations to conduct comprehensive EE and DR market potential studies to provide estimates of technical, economic, and achievable potential for EE and DR. Santee Cooper will use the results of the market potential study to further develop its portfolio of DSM programs currently offered to its residential and commercial customers. Santee Cooper's load forecast reflects the cumulative impact of its DSM programs as implemented to date. This information was provided to Resource Innovations prior to the development of the DSM market potential studies. Resource Innovations use this information as an input to help identify future achievable DSM savings potential. The savings identified in these DSM potential studies were provided to Infront for use in the development of the IRP. Central Electric Power Cooperative and its member cooperatives develop and maintain their own DSM programs. However, Central's DSM program impacts are included in the 2023 IRP. This concludes my summary of my direct testimony. Moving on to my rebuttal. In my rebuttal testimony, I respond to CCL SACE Witness Summer's recommendation that Santee Cooper include in its next IRP an evaluation of the opportunities to optimize its energy efficiency and demand side management potential through enhanced coordination with its municipal and cooperative customers, which include Central. Notwithstanding the fact that Santee Cooper's DSM programs are not within the scope of Act 90 of 2021, Santee Cooper is open to collaborating and engaging in a dialogue with Central and municipal customers regarding the challenges and successes that the respective parties have experienced with DSM programs in an effort to provide additional DSM benefits to the combined system. However, even if the parties engage in the enhanced coordination recommended by Witness Summer, Santee Cooper does not have a role in the implementation or ongoing administration of the DSM programs of Central and its members and vice versa, and so the parties could freely decide whether to implement any lessons learned as they see fit and continue to develop EE or DSM programs independently. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. Mr. Herndon, please state your name for the record.
Jim Herndon.
And by who are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Resource Innovations as a vice president in our advisory services practice.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 10 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on July 14, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision 3 exhibits labeled as Direct Exhibit JH-1, Direct Exhibit JH-2, and Direct Exhibit JH-3 that were previously filed with the Commission as attachments to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Have you any changes or additions to your exhibits?
No.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibits of Mr. Herndon be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Herndon's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand. Mr. Herndon's pre-filed direct exhibits marked JH1 through JH3 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 8 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Herndon, have you also prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision rebuttal testimony of 8 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on October 27th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes, I have.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, I don't.
Listen to the question. No.
Sorry.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Herndon be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Herndon's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Herndon, have you prepared a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please deliver it at this time?
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. In my direct testimony, I introduce and summarize the methodology and the findings of the Energy Efficiency Market Potential Study and Demand Response Market Potential Study that Resource Innovations conducted for Santee Cooper. The primary objectives of the market potential studies attached to my direct testimony were to estimate the energy and demand savings potential over the next 20 years through the installation and deployment of energy efficiency and demand response technologies and practices. The studies included analyses of the savings potential across Santee Cooper's direct served residential and commercial customers, and also estimated the costs and benefits of achieving the projected EE savings and estimated dispatchable demand reductions. The major tasks in assessing the market potential included a market assessment, where current energy consumption patterns and customer characteristics were used to disaggregate the utility load forecast, measure development, where Resource Innovations worked collaboratively with Santee Cooper to develop a comprehensive list of EE technologies and DR products and services that are commercially available and commercially viable in South Carolina, an economic screening, where each EE and DR measure was analyzed to determine the measures and technologies that were cost-effective under the utility cost test, And finally, the achievable potential analysis, where 3 scenarios, a low, a medium, and a high, for EE achievable market potential were analyzed, and where 2 additional scenarios, a base and enhanced, for DR achievable market potential were analyzed to supplement the business as usual scenario provided by Santee Cooper. Resource Innovations' approach is aligned with industry standard methods and has been applied and externally reviewed in numerous regulated jurisdictions. The EE achievable potential identified by the study translates into annual incremental savings that range from 0.3 to 0.8% of annual retail sales for eligible customers over the study period for the low scenario, 0.6 to 1.3% of annual retail sales for the medium scenario, and 0.7 to 1.4% of annual retail sales for the high scenario. DR achievable potential was calculated for the base and enhanced scenarios and separately for summer and winter peaking capacity. The overall winter peak capacity is 74 megawatts in the base scenario and 100 megawatts in the enhanced scenario. This equates to 7.9% of Santee Cooper's winter peak distribution load in the base scenario and 10.7% in the enhanced scenario. The estimated magnitude of summer peak capacity reduction comes out to 101 megawatts in the base scenario and 133 megawatts in the enhanced scenario. This equates to 10.9% of Santee Cooper's summer distribution peak load in the base scenario and 14.3% in the enhanced scenario. This concludes my summary of my direct testimony. In my rebuttal testimony, I respond to certain matters raised in the direct testimony of CCL SACE witness Summer. Specifically, I address the issues she raised regarding the energy efficiency and demand response market potential studies that Resource Innovations conducted for Santee Cooper. Among the issues raised by witness Summer, she asserts that the achievable potential scenarios were constructed arbitrarily in the market potential studies. I disagree with this assertion. The market potential study relies on available data for Santee Cooper's jurisdiction and utilizes a defined analytical procedure. The achievable potential scenarios were strategically developed to analyze the impacts of different influences on the level of energy efficiency that's achievable by Santee Cooper's retail customers. The low, medium, and high scenarios each included changes to specific influencers to determine the potential impact of those changes on Santee Cooper's EE potential. These scenarios were developed collaboratively between Santee Cooper and Resource Innovations to objectively analyze the defined parameters for each scenario. Although witness Summer alleges that Santee Cooper did not seek to maximize cost-effective savings by mixing and matching, the RI approach and models are consistent with industry standard methods that have been applied and reviewed in other jurisdictions. Additionally, the scenario details were shared with the IRP stakeholders in Stakeholder Meeting 4, which was attended by representatives of both SACE and CCL. No stakeholder expressed concerns that these scenarios were arbitrarily developed. In fact, no stakeholder expressed any objections to these scenarios at that meeting along the lines of what was raised here. Witness Summer also asserts that the EE potential may be understated because the market potential study did not consider emerging technologies. I disagree. As an initial matter, the market potential study includes a comprehensive list of measures that are applied to Santee Cooper's load forecast over the study period. The market potential study measure list was shared with the IRP stakeholders in December of 2022, and no comments or suggestions for additional measures, including emerging technology measures, were provided to Resource Innovations by stakeholders. Notwithstanding this, the study approach includes 2 mechanisms that incorporates future, more efficient measures and their impact on market potential. First, the load forecast accounts for future changes to equipment and average efficiency levels in customers' homes through annual adjustments to end-use intensity. Second, the market potential study applies savings for individual measures to this dynamic energy intensity on a percentage basis to account for future technologies, assuming there'll be continued options for energy efficiency savings in the future. Through this analytical approach, the study provides a reasonable estimate of EE and DR market potential, which includes accounting for new products and technologies that will be introduced over the study period and the resulting achievable potential. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Herndon. Chair Belzer, at this time, this panel is available for cross-examination by the parties and commissioner questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Sierra Club?
No questions.
Thank you. Sasiba?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Century Aluminum?
Nothing from Century, thank you.
Thank you. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Ms. Clancy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Herndon and Mr. Altman. My name is Emma Clancy and I represent CCL and SACE. Mr. Herndon, I'll start with you. Now, you developed the energy efficiency and demand response market potential studies for Santee Cooper, correct? That's correct. And it says in your testimony that you've performed 35 market potential studies for numerous utilities. Is that right?
That sounds about right.
And in any of those market potential studies, have you combined different incentive levels to develop low, medium scenarios, or do you always set them to the same level?
We don't always set them to the same level. Usually we take a common approach because we try to be as quantitative and as objective as possible. So it's not always the same levels that we used here, not the 25, 50, or 25 to 30%, and 50 and 75%. But typically we apply a uniform approach for each scenario. But scenarios vary by study.
Okay, so you don't use different incentive levels for each scenario to increase cost effectiveness. Is that what you're saying? If you always apply a uniform approach?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, so if you say you apply a uniform approach, so for the low scenario, you apply 30%.
That's what we did here, yes.
Yeah. So, and you don't typically say combine different incentive levels for different scenarios.
You mean within a single scenario?
Mm-hmm.
Typically not. I mean, like I say, typically achievable potential scenarios are defined individually by study, but I would say the most common approach we take is, by far, is just assuming one common incentive level. And the reason we do this is there's just so many measures. There's over 300 measures, which end up being over 10,000 permutations as you apply them to different types of homes and businesses. And customizing each of those 10,000 measures would just be a really onerous task. So the idea is that we try to set an average incentive level, and that would give us the magnitude of savings for each relative amount of spend by the utility.
Okay, so just to be clear, those incentive levels, that's your approach. It's not the level at which each of those measures might be the most cost effective for each scenario.
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, you've testified, it seems like from your resume, in a lot of IRP proceedings presenting market potential studies. Is that right?
I don't know about a lot, but I've testified before.
Okay. Well, I expect you're generally, appearing to discuss DSM, but are you aware generally of the capacity expansion models like Encompass that utilities use to develop resource portfolios?
Not very familiar.
You're not familiar
No.
with it? Well, are you aware at least that that the Encompass model is a proprietary model that interveners can use if they obtain a license for a fee?
I'm not familiar with the model, but so I'm not familiar. I'm not.
You're not
with
so
that.
familiar that interveners can run their own Encompass modeling?
No, I'm not. I just don't know the Encompass model.
Okay. Now, Nexant uses a model called TPOT to develop its market potential studies, correct?
That's true, but Nexant's now Resource Innovations.
Sorry.
It's all right. We were Nexant for a long time.
Resource Innovations, excuse me. Now, page 8, lines 12 through 16 of your direct testimony describes the model, and I'll read it. The TPOT modeling tool has been specifically developed to accommodate and calibrate to individual utility load forecast data and enables the application of individual DSM measures and analysis of market potential at a high resolution by segment, end use, equipment type, measure, vintage, and year for each scenario analyzed. And you also state on, do you see that testimony?
I do.
You also state on, or the market potential study states on page 3 that TPOT was built on a platform that supplies the ability to calculate multiple scenarios and potential savings based on variable inputs such as sales, load forecasts, electricity prices, discount rates, and historic program savings. So both of those descriptions seem to point to a lot of capabilities, so I'm hoping you can break that down for us just for a bit. And if we could start just with the 5 steps you set out in your direct testimony on page 5 through 6, how do the calculations you can run in Teapot fit into those 5 steps? Sure. So
step one is market assessment. So that's, and Mr. Altman mentioned Santee Cooper providing Santee Cooper load data to us, as well as any customer data, customer characteristic data, benchmark data, things like that. So we take that utility data and supplement that typically with secondary sources where the utility might not know the specific breakout of, say, fuel shares or energy intensity, things like that. But we take utility data like Santee Cooper provides, secondary data, and we disaggregate the utility load forecast by customer segments and by end uses. So we break out into residential and commercial, then we break residential into single-family, multifamily, manufactured housing. So we break out the customer segmentation, and then within those customer segments, we break out the energy forecast into end-use categories. So we break out lighting, space cooling, space heating, water heating, forgetting some, but it's in the report.
So you do all of this in the Teapot model. I'm just
Oh,
curious specifically. So how does your work in the Teapot model, how does it fit into your 5 steps?
So the utility load forecast and that EIA data and other secondary sources are inputs to the Teapot model.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I
No.
misunderstood your question. Yeah. So sorry. Step one is collecting market data. That feeds into the Teapot model and does the forecast disaggregation.
Okay, so does that mean you're applying, like, you're using Teapot to calculate adoption curves for certain measures?
Oh, no, that's, further along. That's in step 4.
Okay, is that also in Teapot?
Yes.
Okay, so each one of these steps is taking place in.
Well, so the Teapot model is the engine that runs the analysis, right? So there's inputs to that model, which are, which I think I listed in my rebuttal testimony, but there's inputs to that. There's the utility load forecast. There's what's in step 2, the measures. So we calculate measure impacts for all of the residential and commercial measures. That's an input to the Teapot model. Those are kind of the 2 big things, the utility load forecast and the measures. And that goes into the Teapot model, and it calculates the technical potential of those measures applied to that load forecast. We also incorporate utility economic data, avoided cost, bill savings, avoided capacity, incorporate all that into the Teapot model. We run the economic screening to see what measures pass the cost-benefit test that's being used for the study.
Okay, so it's calculating the UC.
Correct.
Okay.
And then that gives you economic potential.
Okay.
And then beyond that, we get achievable potential, which is the adoption curves like you've mentioned a few minutes ago.
Okay.
Those get applied to the measures that are cost-effective.
In Teapot.
In Teapot.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, and the formula that goes into Teapot is actually mentioned in our report. It's on page 15 of the report. We have the equation used for the adoption curves.
Okay. And is it at that stage that you might, do you like account for free riders in Teapot? Or is that a separate input?
So it's a little bit different. I mean, free ridership is around utility programs, so the Teapot's estimating market potential.
Okay.
So free ridership usually has to do with how many people within a utility program would have participated in the program anyway. Whereas for the Teapot model, for achievable potential, we're looking at what's the opportunity in the market relative to the utility load forecast.
But that can have a bearing, free riders, on the cost effectiveness, can it not?
For program cost effectiveness. For measure cost effectiveness, no. I mean, we just look at the measure cost, the measure benefits. But from a program perspective, then free ridership can have an effect.
Okay. Now, when you say in rebuttal testimony that the MPS applies savings for individual measures, rebuttal testimony, page 5, lines 18 through 21. And you say there that the market potential study applies savings for individual measures to this dynamic energy intensity on a percentage basis to account for future technologies. Could you just translate that with reference to, is that also done in Teapot?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so how is this, so I know you're calculating the adoption curves. Does this mean you're also calculating how, measure impacts and adoption might change over time in Teapot?
That's right. So I think in the last panel, they mentioned that Santee Cooper is estimating reduction in average household consumption. So we incorporate that Santee Cooper assumption into, that's the load forecast input into the teapot model. And then when the measures get applied, then we assume, say, an Energy Star refrigerator saves 15% over a standard refrigerator.
Okay.
So the refrigerator portion of the load forecast out for 20 years, in the case of this study, assumes that there will be a 15% opportunity for refrigerators all the way through those 20 years. So it doesn't really matter that Santee Cooper's, or it matters, but our study accounts for the fact that the baseline load is going down. So that declining household load, probably assumes there's refrigerators are getting more energy efficient over time. So the study assumes that there's always a 15% better refrigerator, even way out into the future.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of work in teapot.
It does a lot.
Steps 1 through 5. Okay. Now you state that Resource Innovations teapot approach has been externally reviewed in numerous regulated jurisdictions, correct?
Correct.
And that your methodology and modeling tools have undergone extensive regulatory review, correct?
Correct.
Have the teapot spreadsheets been produced in any jurisdiction through discovery or otherwise?
Well, there's not really spreadsheets. I mean, the input spreadsheets and the output spreadsheets.
The model, the teapot Excel model doing all those calculations. Has that been produced in any jurisdiction?
It has not been externally provided. We have provided demonstrations in other jurisdictions. So we've sat down and walked through how the teapot model works, shown how the inputs flow, the things I just described and even more, show how the model works. But we have not handed over the model in any jurisdictions.
So no interveners have been able to conduct their own modeling in teapot, is that correct?
Within teapot, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Altman, I do have a few questions for you. Now, on page 2 of your rebuttal testimony, lines 6 through 8, you state that Act 90 does not apply to Santee Cooper's DSM statute. Is that right? DSM programs, excuse me.
Can you repeat the page and line?
Page 2, lines 6 through 8.
And repeat the question, please.
Just confirming, you state that Act 90 does not apply to Santee Cooper's DSM programs.
That is generally correct, yes.
Okay, now Act 90 requires Santee Cooper to meet the same IRP requirements as other regulated utilities, correct?
I am not immediately familiar with the Act's appropriateness to other regulated utilities. I think what I meant by that statement was, the Commission does not approve the development of our DSM programs or the cost recovery of these programs similar to what they do for the regulated utilities. But I certainly don't mean to imply that there's any limitation that they can evaluate the effectiveness of our DSM studies as inputs to the IRP.
Okay, thank you. And did you know that, so it sounds like you might be aware that in 2 different IRP proceedings, the Commission has required the utility to improve DSM market potential studies.
I'm not immediately familiar, but.
Okay. So it sounds like you're not aware that the Commission has even required one utility to develop more reasonable emerging technology assumptions in its market potential study in an IRP proceeding?
Not intimately, no.
Okay. Now, you just mentioned that, excuse me, no, you just mentioned that the Commission does not review Santee Cooper's DSM portfolios in rider proceedings or program applications like it does for other utilities, correct?
That is my understanding, correct.
Okay. Now, Santee Cooper's DSM portfolio currently saves 0.3% of retail sales. Is that about right?
I can speak in terms of energy impacts or capacity impacts to our most recent load forecast.
Not the prior year sales. I believe Mr. Herndon said that the low forecast, which is business as usual, goes from 0.3% of prior year sales to 0.8 over the study horizon. So is Santee Cooper at 0.3% of retail sales right now? Mr. Herndon, feel free to jump in.
Sorry, so the 0.3 to 0.8 was output of our study.
Okay.
And our study gets calibrated to the Santee Cooper programs, but that 0.3% was not a reference to current Santee Cooper programs.
Okay, so you don't know what the prior retail sales
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Would you disagree with Ms. Summers' testimony that the market potential study found that 2023 incremental savings are 0.34% in the low, 0.5% in the mid, and 0.7% in the high case?
That sounds right. I mean, that was year one of the study.
Okay.
But
the low case also represents the business as usual Santee Cooper's current offerings, correct?
And for the energy efficiency potential study, the incentive levels were set comparable to current. The incentive rate was set comparable, but it wasn't trying to one-for-one match Santee Cooper's current programs. The idea was that if comparable incentives were offered, but we still screened all 300 measures from the utility cost test perspective. So there was some calibration to Santee Cooper's programs, but it was not meant to say that that's what Santee Cooper's exactly, one-for-one with what Santee Cooper is achieving right now.
Okay, so are either of you, do either of you know what savings levels as a percentage of prior year's retail sales Santee Cooper's DSM portfolio has?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
So do neither of you know what savings levels as a percentage of the prior year's retail sales Santee Cooper's DSM portfolio has?
I don't immediately have the prior year's ratio of incremental savings as opposed to sales last year. I do know that as part of our current portfolio programs, we're marching towards a goal of cumulative savings of 100 gigawatt hours by 2030, and we're roughly 60% of that at today's date.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I did not understand the last part after 60%.
So our current portfolio, DSM portfolio, internally we target to save 100 gigawatt hours of cumulative energy efficiency savings by year 2030. And if I recall correctly, we were around 55 megawatts at the end of last program year. So adding to what we saved this past program year, I would anticipate we're in the 60 gigawatt hours cumulative savings to date.
Okay. Mr. Altman, are you aware that at a recent hearing before the House Economic Development Committee, the president of Santee Cooper stated that Santee Cooper does not have the number of robust energy efficiency programs seen in other states?
I was not aware.
Okay. I'll stop there. Thank you both.
Thank you, Ms. Clancy. Central Electric Power Cooperative?
No question.
Thank you. Santee Cooper Industrial Customer Group?
No questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Google LLC?
No questions.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioners? Vice Chair Powers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Herndon, just really one question, or really two. You're aware that there are probably, I think, there's 5 cost effectiveness tests that are used by different commissions and different utilities in determining what cost effectiveness really is.
Yes, sir.
You're aware of the other 4 tests?
Yes, sir.
Did you, in any of your work, even if it's not in your report, did you apply any of the other 4 tests to your modeling or use it in any way?
Not in the current study, we did not screen measures by the other tests. We calculate our model, our teapot model, which was discussed, calculates all the tests, but we didn't screen. We didn't create passing or failing measures by those other tests. We did a prior study for Santee Cooper in 2019 that used the total resource cost test, but moved to the utility cost test for this study.
Well, and I guess that's my real question. Why not? Why did you not use others?
Well, I mean, in terms of determining what's cost effective, you really need one, right? I mean, we use the utility cost test and the benefits relative to cost with the utility cost test. I mean, decide does a measure pass or fail? It would be challenging, I guess, to use two tests to create that scenario, unless you said they have to pass both. Like in some other jurisdictions, there is a requirement where you'd have to pass, say, the participant test and the utility cost test or something like that. But in this case, we just looked at the utility cost test because this was for Santee Cooper's IRP, so the utility cost test is from the utility perspective in terms of what's cost effective to offer. So that was the idea of using the utility cost test as the screening mechanism here.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
Good afternoon. I'll be brief. Actually, Commissioner Powers asked one of my questions, and you answered it. On page 2, or I guess it's page 5 of 70 of your market potential study. Of course, this is from May 15th, 2023. You talk about, well, the UCT, of course. The medium scenario increases incentives offered to a range of measures, let's say 50% of incremental measure cost, and reduces the benefit cost screening threshold for each measure to a UCT value of 0.7. And as I understand it, or thought I've understood it, is whether it's UCT or TRC or ABC, QRT, the PCT, the RIM, the others. If it's less than 1.0, the cost of the program is greater than the value to the customer or participant. Is that the case?
That's correct.
And I understand that there are situations, if it's, low income and things that, this is going to be a benevolent effort. But I'm trying to understand the merit for any programs that cost a customer more than they're worth. Can you help me with that?
Yes, sir. So when we screen, or when anybody screens, I guess, we typically think of sort of 3 levels of economics, right? There's we call the measure level, the program level, and the portfolio level. So for market potential studies and for the low scenario, we focused on that measure level. And by measure, I mean an 18-SEER heat pump or a smart thermostat or a attic insulation. So for the low scenario, we screened, and every single measure on its own had to get a 1.0 or higher, pass the UCT, as you mentioned. For the medium and the high scenarios, we did take a more a slightly different approach, and the 0.7 was a proxy to say, well, what, as you get looking ahead kind of at programs, as you get into programs, like you mentioned, a program should be cost effective, but that program, in some cases, in some jurisdictions, they allow programs, as long as the program's cost effective, you could have some measures that might not be cost effective. So you could have measures with a 0.7 UCT, but you're also going to have some measures with a 2.0 UCT. So when you group those together at the program level, your program passes. So the idea was, since our market potential study really only looked at individual measures, we only did some kind of preliminary, bundle, kind of put together residential HVAC. We didn't really calculate that as a program because it's, the market potential study is really only looking at that as individual measures. So the idea was at a 0.7 that you would still get those higher, the measures that pass or well above 1.0 that would offset that 0.7. So if you bundled those into a program, like I say, residential HVAC program or a commercial lighting program, the program would pass. So the idea was not to have a non-passing program. It was just that the focus of the eventual program planning process would be at that program level rather than requiring that every single measure passes.
Understand. And as I think I heard earlier today, and I've heard in other hearings, when we talk about energy efficiency in general, which good thing that appliances and LED bulbs and all seem to have really had quite an effect, is when it comes to the, I guess I'm trying to understand, where's the break point? I mean, if energy efficiency or appliances, like if my dishwasher goes out, I've got to go buy one. My understanding, at least the folks try to sell me one, all of them are more efficient now than mine used to be. So if that is the general nature of about every appliance, how, and I know that free ridership is looked at, but I wonder about some of the assumptions. How can the free ridership, let me rephrase that. What am I missing relative to what I hear to be the ubiquitous nature of most everything being more efficient than it was, but we're funding programs to encourage people to go and buy what they'd have to buy anyway. So I know I'm missing something, so help me.
I'll try. So I'd say that's true. I mean, the idea, like I mentioned refrigerators earlier, I mean, any refrigerator you buy today is more efficient than a refrigerator 10 or 15 years ago. And appliances is kind of a challenging one. There's a lot of newer appliances are more efficient. But there's different even levels within that, right? There's more standard appliances now, the cheapest dishwasher you could buy versus an Energy Star one. Or even there's this conservation for energy efficiency tiers where you could go beyond Energy Star. You could get, if energy efficiency was your thing, you can really maximize that as opposed to other characteristics of a dishwasher like steam or stainless steel. So the idea is, yes, I mean, and that's what, again, on the last panel, they mentioned that declining household usage is happening naturally. It's referred to as naturally occurring. Things are getting more efficient, either some things through codes and standards, but some things just are getting naturally more efficient. But then there is typically a level above that, and not everyone goes to that level above that. And that's where, or not everyone knows they can go to a level above that. So that's where utility programs can help influence the market, either by educating customers or offering an incentive. In some cases, the incentive's not enough. I mean, you mentioned free ridership and the dishwasher example. Those are challenging because to pass the UCT, you have to keep the incentive very small. And if the incentive is very small, you're not paying enough money to get people's attention. So if they buy that dishwasher and they get that incentive, they're probably going to be a free rider because that incentive is not enough to encourage them to make a difference, as opposed to some other technologies or doing things they might not do anyway. That might get them to do it. But so there's a balance there of things that customers are doing on their own and things that a utility program can influence them. Hopefully that helps.
Oh yeah, very, very much. Thank you. But the bottom line is even in that case, other than where it's clearly subsidized for more benevolent reasons, bottom line is whether it's upgrading to a heat pump water heater versus regular type or whatever it is, ultimately it still should not cost the customer more than doing the program. Is that? True or false?
Correct. Yes, I think that's the participant test. I think, or generally, that's right. The value they get out of participating is more than the cost to the customer of the program. Is that, am I understanding that right?
Well, that would be that one, I guess, but I guess I'm also thinking about the overall customer in general. In other words, you've got 120,000 customers. When it's all said and done, and all these programs are implemented, it shouldn't cost those 120,000 customers more than the programs.
That's right. Yeah,
they shouldn't pay more than they need to.
That's right. That's right. And I think that, I mean, again, I think in terms of these tests, I think that would be most akin to the utility cost test, right? The cost of the program, the cost of utility to offer this program and pay incentives relative to the benefit that the participating customers are seeing. That's right.
Finally, I didn't see this in Santee's, and I don't know whether they do or don't, but I've tried to understand this one also relative to water saver devices. Now, on the one hand, intellectually, I get it if we're talking about water heaters, you know, you got a water saving shower head. But again, as I understand it, you know, from federal law some time back, you can't buy one that's not.
Well, there is requirements on the gallons per minute for shower heads and faucets. There are lower than that. I mean, there are options for lower flow beyond that, and aerators you can. I mean, so there are some things that can go beyond that federal standard.
Understood. But outdoor fixtures, help me understand now exactly how outdoor water saving devices and such, you know, I guess hose bibs or whatever. How does that relate to these kind of programs? I've not understood that one yet.
And you're still talking residential?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so that would not be, I mean, there would not be at the home. I mean, there can be a case made for, you know, maybe back at the water plant, but in the home, yeah, okay, the water saving measures in a home on the electric side are dependent on electric water heating. So the savings for a shower head or an aerator, things like that, the calculation of electric and efficiency savings in the home are on saving hot water. So exterior faucets or spigots or hoses, things like that, where it's cold water, there would not be electric energy savings.
But if I'm understanding what you're saying, is if it's that shower head water saving device, it shouldn't be one I can go just buy at Lowe's. It should be one that's a notch better than Lowe's.
I think Lowe's would Lowe's would sell the range of them. They might not promote them, or it might not be on the top shelf.
I didn't mean to denigrate Lowe's there, but
Home Depot, anybody, big box stores.
Yes, should have said it that way. Good, thank you. Okay, so it would still be maybe on the water heater side if you want to upgrade to one where it just drips out.
That's right. Yeah, it's the water heating savings.
All right, but not outside or anything that's related to coal. I mean that there's no logical reason to have that in these kind of programs.
It would have to be hot water. I mean, it'd have to be connected to an electric device, and that's why it's about residential. On the commercial side, there's pump, like industrial agriculture. There's pumping savings at the site, but residential, yeah, it'd have to be hot water.
Okay. I've used them all up. I'm sorry. That's okay.
I'll take that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Altman. Thank you, Mr. Herndon. Appreciate it. No more questions.
Thanks.
This can be for either one of you. I think it's going to probably be more for you, Mr. Herndon, but let me see. I'm trying to avoid an objection for asking for a legal conclusion here, but are you aware that the IRP statute requires an evaluation of energy efficiency and demand response programs? Are you aware of that or not?
I'm not,
okay.
No.
Subject to check. Well, let me say this. Do you think you would have been asked to do this market study if it wasn't required?
I don't know if I would be asked to do this one, but we have done
Well, in the
market potential.
context of this proceeding.
Oh, well, I was just going to say we have done market potential studies for Santee Cooper before.
Okay. All I want to get to is, with regard to an integrated resource plan and these market potential studies, what are we trying to show versus when we get to, and I understand Santee Cooper's programs are different, but this commission does evaluate EEDSM program measures, I suppose is a more appropriate term, for Dominion Duke companies. Okay. We're not approving measures here. So what is the purpose of including market potential studies in an IRP?
I think it gives you the magnitude of the opportunity, right?
The opportunity.
That's
is that
right.
correct? Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So it won't tell you exactly the type of program, should you run a showerhead program, but it tells you the magnitude of what's the opportunity for savings for water heating or for, the residential sector overall or the commercial sector. So so I think it more focuses on what is the opportunity in the market, and when and how that could happen.
Okay. And you in your studies, you evaluated a whole gamut of measures that are not currently used by Santee Cooper. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. So I think you had, 379 measures in the EE market study potential?
That sounds right.
Okay. And they don't have 379 programs measures in place, do you? Does Santee Cooper have 379 EE programs?
No, ma'am.
Offering? Okay. So what is the purpose of EE and DSM overall with regard to a utility's load?
Well, I think understanding the impacts of the opportunities can help a utility understand where it is cost effective or economic to maybe look at conserving load, shifting load, curtailing load. So I think that's, again, the idea of the market potential study would represent that opportunity, including both the impacts and the economics, the cost of doing that. And then as it goes into an IRP, you can see for the amount of load identified through energy efficiency or DR, how might that fit into resource planning?
And when you say resource planning, that's whether it's going to take building additional resources or perhaps putting in measures to minimize building generation resources. It all fits together, does it not?
I believe it could.
Okay. And it's just another tool in the toolbox to enable the utility to figure out the best way to marshal its resources. Is that correct?
I hope it helps.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Commissioner Carolee Williams, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you very much, Chair Belser. I think this question is probably for you, Mr. Altman. I noticed in your testimony that it says that Central's DSM program impacts are included in the IRP and discussed in testimony by witness Nunes.
Yes, ma'am.
Why does it make sense to separate those two? It may make sense once I hear that testimony, but
Unfortunately, I can't speak, but as far as our direct serve retail customers, including our residential and commercial class of customers, I really would probably defer that to the folks who lead the load forecast effort. I'm mostly charged with, administering and implementing programs to our direct serve class. So.
And I understand that. And I just wondered, kind of going forward, why it wouldn't make sense to have that all under one umbrella and Mr. Herndon be able to respond to that in the future in a, just a bigger picture, as we see these IRPs kind of become better and better over time, if that would not make sense, or if there's something about Central that means that we need to look at those separately. Can you respond to that?
My thoughts also go to Mr. Herndon's, also contracted specifically for our direct serve system and has limited awareness and knowledge of, Central and its members cooperatives and all their nuances and customer bases and that sort of thing. So he'd be in the same situation.
I understand that for this particular IRP. I'm just asking if that is if the possibility that could give us better data, better information, and again, maybe when I hear the next testimony, I'll understand it better.
Perhaps. I would hope that to be the case.
And I'm asking because if Santee Cooper is at 0.3% business as usual, did we kind of get to that point where we agreed that that's true or not?
I don't think we confirmed. The 0.3 was from our study,
Right.
But so I don't think we confirmed Santee Cooper's actuals.
Okay.
At the moment.
Is it close? We don't know.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd say historically we have looked at more of a cumulative basis rather than a year-over-year
right.
analysis.
Okay.
Maybe I can add just a little bit, I guess,
Please
on the
do.
central question, if that's okay. And we went through kind of the 5 steps as we outlined. I mean, there's a lot of detail that goes into our study, so a lot of detail would be needed on Central's customer, in order to, because you want, these studies have a lot of inputs, and you want to have somewhat of the same granularity going in as inputs. You want to be able to understand the customers, their characteristics, the load forecast, the types of measures that apply. So there would be a lot of detail needed on the Central side in order to produce a comparable result like we were able to do for Santee Cooper's customers.
And I'm asking because there's been some recent testimony before a legislative committee that identifies a much higher capability from an energy efficiency perspective within the Central area. So just kind of sometimes we can learn from each other and be inspired by each other, and that's the background for the question. So I'll look forward to meeting Mr. Nunes. Thank you. No further questions.
Commissioners, further questions for this panel?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you. Go back just for a minute to address the benefits of energy efficiency as a resource, and I'll address it to the panel generally and whoever would like to answer. Has energy efficiency evolved to become recognized as an integral and highly valuable element of utility investments and operations as it relates to resource planning?
Is that specific to Santee Cooper or in general?
Just in general.
I mean, I think that, at least from my experience, that varies maybe per utility and per jurisdiction. I would say it's, as I think it was asked earlier on, our studies have fed into numerous IRPs, and they've done that at different points in time over the last 10 to 15 years. So I think it's considered, I don't know if we work with a lot of utilities that do include energy efficiency in their IRPs now, but I'm not sure, what point that started.
I understand. Well, how about for Santee Cooper? When you look at their operations and their planning, does it need to be a part of their planning?
My position would be that it is, and it does, and it is as a part of this, IRP study and filings, and demonstrated that there's a magnitude of opportunity out there for savings, both through energy efficiency and shifting through DR. I would say that we've already begun the program planning process as the next step of the following the market potential studies to try to get those program potential levels and to to leverage the opportunities that are out there.
Very good. And so would you agree that Santee Cooper's energy efficiency programs have yielded significant energy and economic benefits for Santee Cooper and its utility customers?
I would stand behind the success of our programs. As mentioned, the Reduce the Use program, we realized about 209 gigawatt hours of savings over about 9 years. Certainly that market has evolved, and we're looking to leverage the new measures and programs that are cost effective, that provide benefit to both our customers and our utility.
And that's part of the planning process, is to find the lowest cost system resource when comparing potential resources, right? Isn't that one of your goals?
Yes, sir. It would be one of those goals. Yes, sir.
Okay. And would you also agree that saving energy through customer energy efficiency programs generally can be achieved at 1/3 to 1/4 of the cost of fossil fuel-based supply-side alternatives? There's a cost savings there, right?
There is, but
Substantial cost savings.
I don't know that I can speak to specifically that ratio.
Well, if I told you that that's what the data shows, you wouldn't disagree with it, would you?
I suppose if I saw it, no, sir.
Okay. Does energy efficiency ultimately benefit all customers because of the fact that it can lead to less cost for adding generation resources for the particular utility, in this case, Santee Cooper? Doesn't it have a direct impact on the customer bill going forward if it's adopted?
I mean, I would suggest that cost-effective energy efficiency
Yes,
has a benefit, yeah.
Right. So if it passes the utility cost test, do you believe that that's evidence that it is cost-effective?
From a utility perspective, yes, sir. From a utility perspective.
Right. And that's, of course, what we're talking about here from Santee Cooper's utility perspective. You would anticipate that the recommended energy efficiency programs in this IRP would reduce cost for both the customers and for the system at large, primarily because energy efficiency is less costly than building out new generation resources, right?
I mean, I'd say in general, there's a cost curve to energy efficiency. So there's some, energy, as you look at the magnitude of impacts, as you go from the first megawatt or megawatt hour to, up the tree, or up the slope, then there is, there's different magnitudes of energy. Not all energy efficiency is equal, but there is definitely more cost-effective energy efficiency.
And haven't state utility regulators relied on the utility cost test as the primary measure of whether or not a particular energy efficiency program is successful or succeeding or likely to succeed to deliver those cost savings?
Yeah, I mean, it's not universal. I mean, different jurisdictions use different tests, but the utility cost test is one of the common ones.
Is it one that you rely on in your work?
It depends on the usually we follow the rules of the jurisdiction.
Okay.
So we have the capability to calculate all of them, but it usually
Right.
is that's been predetermined before we start our work.
Does South Carolina use the utility cost test, to your knowledge, in their in evaluating energy efficiency programs?
So I have limited knowledge, but I think I believe Duke Energy does, but I'm not sure about Dominion Energy.
How about Santee Cooper?
Well, I mean, their programs aren't regulated.
No, I understand, but do they use the utility cost tests in their IRP analysis?
Oh, in the IR, yes, sir. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We used the utility cost test.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Williams, do you have another question? Okay, that's all right. Thank you. Commissioners, any further questions for this panel? Any redirect? No redirect. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your appearance here today and for your testimony. You may stand down.
Chair Belzer, subject to your admonition, we request that witnesses.
You know what my answer is going to be,
I know,
Mr.
But I still need to clarify for the record that they've been relieved. So that Jacob Thomas and Gregory McCormick, as well as this panel, may be excused subject to recall.
They may stand down, and you excuse them at your peril.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, we've reached past 5 o'clock. It's probably a good stopping place so that we don't keep somebody under oath overnight. Ladies and gentlemen, I usually on the second and continuing days, I usually like to start at 9:30. I hope that won't be a hardship to anyone, but we will resume tomorrow morning at 9:30. Y'all have a good evening. Thank you. We are in recess until 9:30 tomorrow.